Hello guys, welcome to the fourth PHP class. We are going to be looking at PHP global variables called super globals. So super global variables are actually some predefined variables in PHP. Which means that they are always accessible regardless the scope, and you can access them from any function, class or file without having to do anything special. So these are some of the super global, or these are the super globals we have in PHP: globals, server, request, post, files, get, env. Alright, we'll be taking further look at this with examples, and the most common ones are what we are going to look into. So on the side here, you see that we have first the global. So let's take an example of PHP global variables. So globals is a PHP super global variable which is used to access global variables from anywhere in the PHP script, also from within functions or methods. PHP also stores global variables in an array called this. Then the index holds the name of the variable which we want to call. Now, without further ado, let us get started. So let's create our super global file here. Let us call it supers. Simple HTML. Simple function here, x equal to 2, I equal to have a function to view it as this. And we'll say here, we'll use the global here. Global z will be equal to global x you see that we've not actually used these variables directly. Normally we would pass in x and y into a function to use it, or we actually define them inside the function, but here we are calling them as global variables because they are accessible in the whole file. Say echo expecting the results of the variable z. We define z anyway, not looking like. So in our browser, let us go to supers PHP and define variable p. Let's check our example here. Okay, we did not call our function. That is the reason for the error, meaning this was never run. Now, if we call our function here, add. So these are the little things we have to check out for. Make sure that we actually call our function before we do anything. So we refresh and see here we have 7. So what this example has shown us that is we can access variables that are not inside our function scope and use them in that function, and without even defining a variable z, we can create a global variable and initialize it to a value and still use it the same way we would use a normal variable. So this is the power of using global variables. So for our next super global, we have server. So super global, now we have the server super global. So the server, the PHP super global variable, which holds information about headers, paths, and script locations. So for this, let's take this example you gave and walk through it. Comment out this example. This. Some of these will explain themselves once I run it. Supers. So what we have here first is the path, the file path. So it says PHP self, meaning itself, the location of this particular PHP file. This is the supers of PHP. It shows the relative path. The server name. Server name here is basically, because we are using XAMPP server. XAMPP server runs on localhost. We have here localhost. Then the HTTP host, still localhost. You can see it here. HTTP referrer actually failed. I don't know why yet, but you can just comment this out. Refresh that. And the others, you can actually see them in the description here in the military school. So you can take a look at other examples here, some useful examples here in the documentation. So you can play around with these values. So next example we have is, next the super global we have is the request super global. So now we're actually coming into using forms, HTML forms in PHP. So let's read here. The PHP request super global is a variable which is used to collect data after submitting an HTML form. Now the example here shows a simple form that accepts an input name, and then when you submit the name, we use the super global server here and get the request method. Check for the request method, then run a particular set of code if we meet this criteria. Now let us take this example. So notice here the forms are not in the PHP tag, so take it here, paste format. Okay. Next, let's copy this block of code. Comment this out. Let's join this session so you can see what we're doing. So this is the first server. This is the first server variable that we're going to be looking at, the request method. So basically, we have a form here. I'm sure you looked at the form tag also. This is a simple form where we accept an input, and then we have a submit button. Now our request method here is post, and then the action is basically where this button, this submit button, will send us to. And in our last example, we saw that PHP self actually returns the location of our PHP file, which is supers.php. Alright then, let us run this example and see what happens. Refresh. A simple form. Gabriel. Then prints my name. If we submit an empty form, we say the name is empty. Now look at this. Let us take a look at this example. If the server's request method is equals to post, which it is, we are going to run this block of code. I'm sure you remember that we've taken the if else statements examples. Now we have name equals to request fname. Now where did this fname come from? If we look at our form here, in the inputs we have type text. Now we gave this a name. We gave our input field a name called fname. This fname is actually imputed into the server global variable when you send the request. And also you can use that value also too in the request super global. Okay, we're even using two super globals here, the server and the request. So the request is the one that contains the name of an input field from your form, then you use this name to perform values. It says if empty name, meaning this function determines whether a variable is empty. So it determines if name is empty. If it is empty, we are going to print out name is empty. Else, which is if it is not empty, we are going to echo out the name of the person. So this is a simple example, very helpful. Let's change a few things. If we actually change this request method to get, and we run this and Gabriel, you see nothing actually happens. Why? Because the request method here is not equals to post. If we do that get and run this, Pascal, submit, we have Pascal. Note that this is called a request URL. We'll get into that later. So we can actually add a few more fields just to play around with. Let's say first name and last name. That's why this is L name. Since F name, L name. We're looking for request L name here. If empty, F name. So the pipe sign here means or. So means if this is empty or this is empty, you run this file. And I also actually say name, full name, here we can echo out your full name is variable f name let's try it out. And define a array key. From line 22. Oh, okay. Because of our request, run that file again. Don't worry, because support Gabriel Pro submit. Your full name is Gabriel Pro Pascal Gates. Your full name is Pascal Gates. So if we leave any of these empty, say your full name is required. So your full name is required. So as another example for the request super global. Now we have the post super global. The PHP post is a super global used to collect form data after submitting an HTTP form with method post. And the post method is used to pass variables. Now, whenever we have the post method in our form, instead of looking for the whole request, we can actually look for these values inside the post super global. That's what this means. In this simple example, we still use the post to retrieve the name instead of the request. I will actually comment this, give this a comment. So to comment this, paste here. We'll have the post. So let us take let us change this part to post and use the post here instead. Now notice that this will work exactly the same way as it did before. See that it still works the same way because it takes value from your post method. Now, okay, let us try and cause a crash here. Let us give here get. Let us change here. Let's leave here as it is. Okay. In order for this code to run, we have to let it be get. Now, we run this block. We have to refresh. Let's refresh. Now you see it failed here saying undefined array key F name. Undefined array key L name. This means that the values it's trying to look for, F name and L name, they are not in the post super global. So as simple as that. Let me correct this back, make sure that it works. So it works as normal. That's it for the post super global. And the get super global more or less works the same way. But let's actually do something different. We are going to send these two files, but we will use them in a different file. So instead of echoing here, notice that we can run PHP, we can use PHP scripts anywhere. So just by defining the opening and closing of the PHP block, it enabled us to use this simple output function, the echo. So PHP can actually be used anywhere on the HTML file, as far as you specify this open and close. So let us comment this example. And our next example is the get super global. So let us create the new file, the get super. This will be solely a PHP file because we are not going to be doing any HTML practices there, but we can actually echo out some HTML tags. And what we are going to be running is a simple if else statement. So if we're going to use a little inbuilt PHP function here, we're going to use isSet. What does isSet do? It determines if a variable declared. It determines if a variable is declared and is different than null. So I hope you understood that. That means if a variable is declared and is different from null, that is, make sure that the variable is not empty. So if we set get fname let's just get this now because this is a little bit advanced, so it's not confusing. In our form here, the supers.php, we actually pass in the location of this file right here. So notice that this is our current directory. It is inside the same folder we are at. So we have a slash get soup.php. Or you can actually name it as get soup.php because they are the same folder. So what will we be getting? First name, this is F name, and the last name. Have a simple echo function here, echo out get fname. Echo out get L name. In position and quotes. Is it actually all? Echo use. It actually doesn't work. Let's take this out and use concatenation. Concatenation in PHP is a dot. So to print out this. Now let us make sure our form actually is a get method. And let us refresh our supers. Gabriel Pro submit. Gabriel Pro is your full name. Note that there is no space. Now let us add a little space here. Now I get to space, format it a little. You can see what's going on. Refresh. So Gabriel Pro is your full name. So what happened here? So you see that this is now calling the getSoup.php, passing into the request some parameters, the f name which is equals to Gabriel, and the l name which is equals to Pro. Yeah, this is what happens. The action directs after the submit button is clicked. The action determines where this submit button will send you to and where the data is also sent to. So once the submit was clicked, you are redirected to this file with the get method, and in that get super global you could find our f name and l name, and then this function was simply run. So this is the power of super globals. Very useful to understand the basics of PHP, and this can actually give you something to start with when you want to start building web forms. So now that we are done with these examples, I would urge you to try and play around with this, get familiar with it just a little, so you actually know how using forms work. And again, I advise you to come to this page, the PHP lessons page, and try out using the PHP form handling, form validation and all. Just try your hands on it. They actually give simple examples, some examples that we worked on, then they explain form validation to you, just making sure that the user passes in data they are meant to pass. We have the validation, making sure the name field is required, email required, optional. So we can actually move into our object-oriented programming with Laravel after this. So thank you guys for attending the class, thank you guys for watching, and we'll get to the next class, which is object-oriented programming with Laravel. Thank you.